Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this edition of Wine, Women, and Words. And joining us is Michelle, and she will say hello in a moment because she's currently frozen. Technology is a wonderful thing, you guys, I swear. But our guest today is Susan Stokes Chapman, and we're here to talk about her book, Pandora. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So to go ahead and get started, for those who aren't familiar with Pandora just yet, could you give us a brief synopsis?
Absolutely. So Pandora is what I would call a loose reinterpretation of the Greek myth Pandora's box rather than a straight retelling. I have essentially placed the myth into Georgian London, which is a bit of a bold move, and I'll be able to tell you why I chose that in a moment. But it's basically about a young jewelry artist named Dora Blake. She is living in poverty and a bit of neglect as well in her uncle's antiquity shop, which used to be her parents', and it was once famed and respected. But the uncle Hezekiah has rather kind of run it into the ground, and she's very much frustrated at this, and she wants to make it out on her own and be her own woman and her own money maker, so to speak. And the only way she can do this for her is to use her talents as an artist to create jewelry designs, which she's hoping will one day be accepted by the London Beau Monde. And that's essentially what she's doing while she's just living in a very horrible situation. And her uncle one day gets a delivery in. He's extremely shady about this. He's acting very, very strangely around it. And so he hides it in the basement where she's never been allowed to go. And very intrigued by this behavior, she decides to break into the basement. And what she finds down there is a very beautiful, very ancient looking Greek vase. And she decides to use the designs on it for inspiration for her jewelry designs. But she's very confused as to why it's there and why her uncle should try to hide it. And so she enlists the help of young antiquarian scholar Edward Lawrence. And together they basically find out that this vase is the key to shaping their destinies.
So intriguing. And it was such fun reading about it. And I love that you brought up the time period that you sit in, because it was 1799, correct?
Yes.
And I loved 18th century because you have, my last book behind me, it was 18th century, and there was so much upheaval during the time period. And the year that you put it in, it was like at the end of that and at the cusp. I can't talk today, so we have one with technical issues and the other one who can't quite talk yet. You have the cusp of the Regency era.
That's right. Yes.
And since you brought it up, let's delve into that. Why did you put the book during that time period?
Of course. Well, it is a bit of a long-winded answer, and I'll try to be as quick about it as I can without rushing it, so to speak. But essentially what it is that I've always loved the Georgian period anyway. That came about from my love of the 1995 BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. I must have been about 9 or 10 when I watched it. And I fell in love, I think, with the romance of it. And, I was being a child essentially at the time, I was watching it through very rose-tinted glasses, but that was where my love of the era began, and I later began researching it, and I did a few modules at university in that era, so the romanticists and Keats and Byron and Shelley. So by the time I started writing this, I knew an awful lot about the era. I'd also written a novel previously that has since been shelved in Georgian London as well. So aside from my passion for the era, I also didn't really want to waste the research I'd done. So I knew no matter what, I was going to write this novel in Georgian London. But the idea of Pandora's box and using that, it sort of was a bit of a light bulb idea for me. Dora and Hermes, her pet magpie, they came into my head fully formed. And the idea of Pandora's box, well, let's be honest, whether you're a classicist or not, and I am not, I'm going to put that out there right now, you know about Pandora's box. Everybody has heard this story. Pandora, the first woman, was given a box by Zeus, told not to open it, she opens it, all the evils of the world come out, and so horrified she slams the lid shut and hope remains. And it's a really, really interesting premise. And when I just started looking up the myth, I was trying to figure out how on earth I was going to get this into the Georgian period. And thankfully, it turns out that on my research, I've discovered that Pandora's box was never a box at all, but it was actually a vase. This was due to a mistranslation by the philosopher Erasmus, who, when he was translating Hesiod's Book of Days, which had the Pandora story in it, he used the word pithos, which is Greek for vase, and he confused it with the word pixis, which was the Latin word for box. And so essentially this mistranslation kind of ended up going down the ages as to the, it turns into essentially the myth that we know today, which is Pandora's box. But based on the fact that it was a vase, I thought, okay, I can do this, simply because going back to the Georgians, they were completely obsessed with antiquity, anything ancient world, Greek and Roman. This was apparent from the style of the clothing, for instance, for the women. You mentioned, Anna, that, we're on the cusp of the Regency. So the Regency hadn't actually happened yet, but the fashions were already in place. So we had these very feminine, flowing sort of fashions where the skirts started underneath the bust, and you had these kind of essentially Grecian looking togas in terms of the wearing. Jewelry such as cameos, many of those are depicted as a Greek or Roman god or goddess. You've got the typical bay leaf crown and these curls and these kind of draping material at the shoulders, and the architecture as well. So if you look at any 18th century building, many of them had the antiquated columns, so Doric columns. They're very kind of elegantly shaped at the top. Essentially, they took inspiration from the ancient world, and it's also where their love of archaeology came from. Pompeii was excavated in the Georgian period, and we have also the Elgin marbles that were taken out, and essentially a massive collection of Greek vases, which you can see today in the British Museum. And that came across from William Hamilton, the majority of them. Now, William Hamilton, he's the main character in Pandora, and I really wanted to play about with this and use it. So obviously with the research of Pandora's box being a vase, and then finding out about Georgian antiquity, it made me discover a news report about the HMS Colossus, which was a naval ship sinking. And it turns out that during his station at Naples, William Hamilton decided, for the safety, and this is the irony of it, the safety of all of his vases, that it was better to ship them back to England, because he didn't want Napoleon getting hold of them. And so he ships them back to England on the HMS Colossus, and what happens? The ship sinks. Mm-hmm. And so all of these vases are at the bottom of the ocean. But are they? That's where I wanted to play about with it. And that's the great thing about historical fiction, is that you can kind of take a fact and play about with it and think, what if I do this? And so, yeah, that's essentially how the whole thing sort of kind of came together.
And I love that we have a character in common in both of our books. That was something that I enjoyed, because William Hamilton is, because I wrote about the Neapolitan court, and he was very much a part of that, and he was a friend to the Queen, and during her time period they did most of the excavations of the Pompeii and Herculaneum. And when I went to her palace, Caserta, they had a lot that they had taken from Pompeii that she had put in her palace.
Yes, yeah, and it's funny, really, isn't it? Because I mean, it's in the news recently as well, how a lot of the treasures that have been taken from these places should really be returned. And the William Hamilton didn't want Napoleon getting hold of his stuff, or anybody's stuff. He thought that was a massive issue, because in Hamilton's eyes, it was all done illegally. And then we have
Yeah.
Hezekiah as a character who's trading on the black market.
Mhm.
So he's not doing anything above board either. And William Hamilton really lambasted, Hezekiah and Napoleon for this. And yet he was doing exactly the same thing, but in his head, it was legal. In his head, he was doing everything right because he donated a lot of his collection to the British Museum and sold it off. And to him, he was giving it back to the people. And that was suddenly okay, but it wasn't at all. We were nicking stuff from other countries, and that's wrong. It is wrong. But
It's so true.
how
And we don't, that's one of the things that I feel like when it comes to Napoleon and his character that we never really talk about in his mythology, about how much he took from other countries. And, when I was doing my research on Naples, he would go through and he would pick out all the gold and stuff that he wanted. And he let his soldiers do it. So long as he was able to pick what he wanted from it. He'd go over what they took. If there's something from that he wanted, he would take.
Yeah.
And then they would take the rest. And there was so much terror in all of that. And Maria Carolina had amassed this huge art collection in addition to the antiquities. And so they were just so fearful of him taking all of this that she had, painstakingly collected and utilized and hired artists to do. It was he was a terror for a lot of the royalty during that time period.
He was, yes. But again, as I say, it's just so interesting how each person who does this thinks they are legally in the right and how they think it's okay. But that's one of the things I did want to explore a lot in Pandora, what was right, what was wrong. And while Dora herself doesn't have any kind of main say in the way that Hezekiah sells the pieces, she definitely is somebody who tries to take matters into her own hands in other ways, and to kind of show just how bad Hezekiah really is. And obviously so does Edward Lawrence. He's we have the other element of the plot where he is trying to find his way into the Society of Antiquaries, and the only way he can do that is to write these papers. And I don't want to give too much away for those who haven't read it, but you have that kind of conflict between Dora and Edward, and the question of, as I said, what is right, what is wrong. But I had fun with this novel, and while I am not a classicist, trying to link all of the elements of the myth into the novel, I did try my very, very best to weave everything through. And we have all of the sins of Pandora's box coming out and impacting the characters in certain ways. But the one thing I wanted to make sure happened, despite the black market element and the illegal kind of containment of antiquities, and what we knew was not correct in terms of what should be done and what shouldn't be done, I wanted that element of hope all the way through the novel. And so I tried to pick out as much as I could and translate it in a different way.
And Michelle, I know you've got some questions before you freeze again.
Oh my gosh, the computer hates me today. Every time you two freeze, that's when I know that I have actually been the one to freeze, and I just wait for it to kick me out.
So we shouldn't just pose and mess with you, right?
No, don't on the count of 3, stop moving. No, but I was very fascinated by, and I had to pull it up on Google again because is it Cantil or Cantil, the type of jewelry work that she does?
It's Cantil.
Cantil. I was fascinated by that, and I looked it up because I wasn't familiar with it, and I don't know if I've just never come across it or I've seen it and didn't know what it was. How did Dora lead you to that profession?
Right, well, I've always rather liked antique jewels myself, I must admit. And as I said earlier, for some reason, Dora just popped into my head fully formed, and I knew she wanted to be a jewelry designer. So maybe my own love of antique jewelry kind of had a subconscious element there. But as much as I liked it, I didn't know how actually jewelry was made, especially in the Georgian period. So I had to do a lot of research there, just like I did with the antiquity trade and the black market. So loads of kind of different elements of research I had to do. But the jewelry part was very, very fun. In the author's note, I do actually mention a book, which is, very cleverly called Georgian Jewelry. And it's a complete magpie of a book. If you were to open it, it's filled with photographs of genuine pieces from antiquity, and it said the type of jewelry that was worn for day and for evening and for morning and for all that sort of thing, and what the different colours meant, and the different gems or fake gems, so paste, for instance. And cannateal was one of the elements that was spoken about, and it described exactly how it was made. And a lot of the time these would come in Peru sets. So Peru sets, they're a whole kind of jewelry collection for the very rich ladies. So it would include, for instance, a tiara and a necklace and the earrings and the bracelet, and sometimes the brooch to go on the top of the corset. And yeah, it's such a beautiful, beautiful book, but it was also extremely fascinating. And of course, I had to make sure then I got as much in there as possible without saturating the novel in it. But yeah, I found the cannateal element so interesting, and that's why I wanted Dora specifically to be using that at the beginning of the novel specifically. But I mentioned cameos earlier, but cameos as well, they were massively popular in the Georgian period, and there was a whole section in this book about cameos and the way that they were made. And just, yeah, I loved looking at that book. And to be perfectly honest, that was my main source material, because it seems to be the only definitive, complete book on the subject. And so if anybody is interested in Georgian jewelry, you absolutely have to go and get this book. And like I said, the full details are in my author's note.
Well, I feel like no outfit really is complete without a tiara, really.
Oh,
so
absolutely not. Everyone needs it.
Necessary component for any occasion.
I mean, I have my own tiara. It's sitting in a jewelry box. I keep it for special occasions myself, and to remind my husband that I am a princess. And
I'm slightly disappointed you're not wearing it now, actually.
I kind of am. I'm giving it a rest. It needs a rest.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
it needs cleaning.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, we aren't on video. We're only audio. So I mean, what's the point?
It's very true. But it would have given me a little thrill to see it.
Oh.
And I know we're almost at time, but I am very curious about Hermes. If there was I'm not too familiar with Greek mythology, but I was curious as far as the meaning behind it, if there was a meaning or a tie to Pandora for him, or if he was just there for Dora.
Initially, he was just there because, as I said, I think I have my elements of superstition, and from a little girl, I've always kind of saluted the magpies, one for sorrow, two for joy, that sort of thing. So again, the fact that Hermes also came into my head fully formed, it was just those two characters that happened with, by the way. That might have been a subconscious decision. And initially, he was just the pet. And again, without giving too much away, he does have a very specific use in the novel. He's what takes us essentially through all of the parts of the novel, and is a very big key to certain mysteries, let's say. But I think in terms of how he's represented, Hermes is a magpie. Magpies like stealing things, and Hermes, the name, actually comes from Greek mythology, and he was the god of thieves, and he was the god of mischief, and he was also a messenger of the gods. So I think symbolically it worked out rather well. Yeah, I love Hermes. I do have a very big soft spot for hermits. I'm even getting a taxidermy magpie to go in my office, because I want my own. I want my own hermits. Ethically sourced, I will say this, ethically sourced, died naturally. But yeah, I do
love that.
love them.
Yes, he's hard not to love from from his first scene. He's very hard not to love. So anytime there's a pet or an animal involved, I have to ask about him.
That's fair enough.
But I know, I think we might have like just wandered through our questions. We always love diving into research. Like we could nerd out on research
all day.
All day. We could dedicate an entire podcast just to research into novels.
The one thing I would like to say is that, as I said earlier, this is a loose reinterpretation rather than a retelling. But I think we can all agree that women in Greek myth are written very much as the victim or the villains. They're very misogynistic tales. And Pandora, the mythical Pandora, she was punished essentially for her curiosity. Curiosity for Pandora was very much a sin. And I did, with my novel, want to kind of turn that element on its head. I wanted Dora's curiosity to be what would actually save her in the end, and I wanted her to be the hero of her own story, because everything that happens to Dora, it's done off Dora's own back. Every decision that is made brings Dora to essentially the end and everything good that comes her way. And so yeah, I wanted to give the mythical Pandora agency through my own Dora Blake, and I hope that readers who do read the novel will see that and love Dora's strength and her heroism.
I love that. I absolutely love that.
Thank you.
And I think that does really show through. And there isn't really a moment from the beginning of the book that Dora is like, she may have moments where she hesitates or she's not sure, but she's not one to back down, and she's not one to stop chasing what she wants to chase.
She's a very, very stubborn creature.
Yes. But thank you so much. I know we had technical difficulties, time zone calculations, and daylight savings definitely threw its own mischief in there. But I'm so glad that we were able to have you on about this, because it's been so much fun chatting with you.
Oh, and it's been lovely chatting with you, and I'm just so sorry we had Wi-Fi issues and all of
that.
No. Doesn't it?
I mean, it wouldn't be a podcast without any of that technical stuff.
Right? It just wouldn't.
It wouldn't.
No.
But everyone, if you would like to order your own copy of Pandora, please be sure to check out our show notes and click on the link to our bookshop on bookshop.org. As always, bookshop.org supports our incredible writers. It supports the podcast, but most importantly, it supports all the wonderful indie bookstores there. And Susan, I hope you have a wonderful night, and thank you for making time for us.
Oh, thank you very much. We got there in the end.
Have a lovely evening.
And to you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.